Ever feel like cybersecurity compliance is speaking a whole different language? Like you need a decoder ring just to understand the basics.
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way sometimes, right?
Well, today we're tackling that exact challenge, diving deep into how new tools, especially something called OSCAL, aim to make compliance less of a headache.
It really is an interesting shift we're seeing moving away from those old clunky methods towards something more streamlined and automated.
Right. I mean, we've all been there drowning in a sea of acronyms, HIPAA, PCI, DSS, NIST. It's enough to make anyone's head spin.
It's true.
And then on top of that, you have this constant struggle to stay updated on the latest changes and then prove everything to auditors.
Right.
Actually, one article we came across used a really interesting phrase, reciprocity mindset. Have you heard that one before?
I have, yeah.
Basically, it argues that we should try to find the common ground between all these different regulations instead of treating each one like it's its own separate thing.
Absolutely. And it makes so much more sense that way, too.
Mm.
You're not siloing your efforts. You're building a compliance framework that can adapt and be applied across the board, which saves tons of time and resources.
Right, it's a smarter way to work, for sure. And this is where I think OSCAL comes in, right?
Exactly. OSCAL is short for Open Security Controls Assessment Language. Think of it kind of like a universal language for security controls. It gets rid of that ambiguity you were talking about by providing a standardized format for expressing security controls and assessments.
Yeah.
And the best part is it's machine readable.
So no more miscommunication or struggling to figure out different interpretations of the same requirement.
Exactly. And here's the real clincher. OSCAL was developed by NIST, a major authority in cybersecurity in collaboration with FedRAMP. They're the ones hyper-focused on cloud security for federal agencies.
Wow, so we're talking some serious credibility and backing for this standard, which is definitely reassuring. But a language is only as good as the tools that are available to actually use it right. That's where I think OSCAL Compass
Hmm.
comes in.
Yeah, OSCAL Compass is a suite of open source tools designed specifically to work with OSCAL. It's like a toolbox that was built to simplify and automate compliance tasks.
And just to add to the whole serious credentials thing, I found out that OSCAL Compass is actually an official CNCF project. Now, for those who might not be familiar with that world, CNCF stands for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They're the same group behind Kubernetes, which is a really big deal in cloud computing.
Huge. It really is. And just being a part of the CNCF shows that OSCAL Compass is more than just some niche project. It's embedded within a vibrant and growing open source community that has support from some of the biggest names in tech.
It sounds like something worth keeping an eye on for sure. Although I did read that OSCAL Compass is still relatively new. It reached the sandbox maturity level within the CNCF back in June, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's still early days, but it's super exciting to see a project like this at the cutting edge of compliance automation. And within this whole toolbox that we've been talking about, there's one tool in particular that's been creating a lot of buzz. Have you heard of Trestle?
I have heard of Trestle. Let's dive into that a little bit. What makes Trestle so special?
So Trestle is a command line tool and software development kit, or SDK. It's designed specifically for working with OSCAL.
So it's mainly designed for developers then, people who are really comfortable working with code.
Yeah, exactly. But here's what makes it so interesting for everyone, regardless of how much you know about coding. Trestle allows users to manage compliance documentation as code.
Hold on, compliance documentation as code. For those of us who don't speak developer, could you break that down a little?
Of course, it basically means that instead of dealing with these static documents, you'll have compliance artifacts that are trackable, auditable, and version controlled. Just imagine having a complete history of every single change made to a document, who made it when they made it, and why.
Wow. That's a game changer when it comes to accountability and transparency, right?
Mhm.
No more digging through endless email chains trying to figure out who changed what and when.
You got it. Plus, Trestle uses familiar formats like JSON, which is great for machines, and Markdown, which is easy for us humans to read and edit. It's all about finding that sweet spot between human readability and machine automation.
It sounds like they really thought of everything to make this as user-friendly as possible. But let's bring this back down to earth for a second. How would a team actually use OSCAL Compass, specifically Trestle, in their day-to-day work?
Okay, so let's imagine a scenario where we have a security team and they're working with developers to make sure that a new application meets all of the necessary compliance requirements. In the past, this might have involved a lot of back and forth. Security would hand over this massive documented controls and kind of just hope for the best.
And then probably find out later on that something wasn't implemented correctly.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Right. It happens all the time. But with OSCAL Compass, they could use a tool like Agile Authoring to actually collaborate on the documentation together.
Oh,
This lets them work together in a much more agile way. They can track changes, make sure everyone's on the same page, and it all happens within a familiar development workflow.
so it's like bringing that same rigor and transparency of software development to the world of compliance documentation. I like it.
Exactly. And it gets even better. Once they have all of the documentation in place, OSCAL Compass can actually connect to what are known as policy engines to automate the compliance checks themselves.
Okay, I have to admit, policy engines sounds a little intimidating. Can you break that down for me? What exactly is a policy engine?
Sure. Think of a policy engine like a set of rules that govern all of your IT systems. These rules define how your infrastructure should be configured, what applications are allowed to run that kind of thing. They basically enforce your organization's security policies.
So it's like having an automated security guard that's constantly monitoring your systems and making sure that everything's following the rules.
That's a great way to put it. And the component within OSCAL Compass that handles this is called compliance to policy, or C2P. It acts as a bridge between the compliance as code we've been talking about, thanks to Trestle, and the policy as code that these policy engines use.
So it's like translating the compliance requirements into a language that these policy engines can actually understand and enforce.
Yes, exactly. And here's why that's so powerful. C2P supports some really popular policy engines like Kyverno and Open Cluster Management Policy Framework, which are commonly used with Kubernetes, that popular system for managing applications in the cloud.
So with OSCAL Compass, we're not just automating compliance on paper, we're actually building it into the foundation of modern cloud-based
You
systems.
got it. It's about ditching those periodic compliance checks,
Yeah.
which, let's face it, are reactive and prone to human error, and instead embracing this idea of continuous compliance.
So instead of scrambling to fix things right before an audit, organizations can actually build security and compliance into their everyday operations, which honestly sounds way less stressful and a lot more efficient.
Absolutely. And it just creates a much stronger security posture overall. Now, while we've been really focusing on the nuts and bolts of how these tools actually work, it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture here.
Right. We've covered a lot of ground today. But what does this shift toward more automated compliance actually mean for organizations, for the industry as a whole?
It's potentially transformative, honestly. Think about how much easier audits would be if all of your compliance documentation was standardized, machine-readable, and easily accessible.
Right. Instead of scrambling to gather all the evidence and compile those reports manually, organizations could potentially just generate them automatically using tools like OSCAL
Yeah,
Compass.
that's the dream, right?
Yeah.
Talk about a massive time saver.
Huge.
And it's not just about being more efficient either. It's about transparency too. When you're managing compliance as code, it creates this clear, auditable trail of every decision, every single change, every assessment.
It's huge for accountability, for sure. Organizations can easily prove to auditors, regulators, even their own customers that they're serious about security and actually following best practices.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the cultural impact either. When compliance is baked right into the development lifecycle and you're automating as much as you can, it really fosters a sense of shared responsibility for security across the board.
Right, it becomes everyone's responsibility, not just something that the security team handles all by itself.
Exactly.
That kind of shift in mindset is crucial for building a strong security culture in general.
It really is. This actually brings up some interesting questions about the future.
Mhm.
As more organizations adopt OSCAL and these tools like OSCAL Compass, do you think we're headed towards a future where compliance is completely standardized and automated?
Now, that's a fascinating thought. I mean, could we actually see a future where regulators are using these standardized formats and automated tools to monitor compliance in real time instead of relying on those periodic audits?
I don't think it's impossible. Imagine organizations just submitting all their compliance data electronically, and then these automated systems just flag any potential issues immediately.
That would completely change the game.
Right.
Streamline the entire regulatory process, reduce the burden on everyone, and it could potentially lead to a much more secure digital world overall.
Exactly. And even beyond just the automation part, OSCAL's standardized format could enable much better information sharing and collaboration between organizations and regulators.
Right. So organizations could actually learn from each other's successes and challenges and then work together to address any new threats as they emerge.
Exactly. That's the hope, at least.
That's really cool. Of course, with any new technology like this, we really have to consider those ethical implications.
Absolutely. We have to make sure that as we move toward this more automated future, that we don't completely lose sight of the human element. For instance, how do we make sure that those automated compliance checks are being applied fairly and that they don't create unnecessary hurdles for smaller organizations or stifle innovation?
That's a really great point. It's a real balancing act. We need to make sure that we're harnessing the power of these tools to actually improve security and streamline compliance, but we have to do it responsibly and ethically.
Well said. I completely agree. It requires ongoing dialogue and thoughtful consideration from everyone, and of course, commitment to using these advancements for the greater good.
Very well said. As we start to wrap up this deep dive into the world of OSCAL and automated compliance, we'll leave you with this thought.
How can we as individuals and organizations ensure that human oversight and those ethical considerations stay at the forefront as we move further into this realm of automated compliance?
It's definitely a question worth pondering, and it's a conversation we all need to be a part of. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today.
We hope you enjoyed exploring the potential of OSCAL and learning about how it could impact the future of cybersecurity compliance.
Until next time, stay curious and stay secure.